Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Salt Mine. This is going to be episode number 9, coming off the first week of the very first NACL playoffs, where Evil Geniuses is not a top 12 NACL team. My name is Gordo. I am joined by TDS and Nyarko as per usual, and we're just going to go through the last week's set of playoff games and just give some of our thoughts. So I figure we'll go round by round here. Start things off with the very first round, the 8 matches that were played, high seeds against low seeds, that kicked this whole bracket off. What series do you guys feel like we should highlight here?
So I have one that I already think should be the most the closest one. First of all, the one that I'm glad happened because it made me look good, which is obviously the TSM CLG one, with nobody having expectations on TSM and they delivering it. So I kind of feel like that's the best one, especially because I feel like that was the closest when you think about the overall other games.
Yeah, I think that's a fair call out on where to start. I think that was our only true upset versus what we predicted. We did miss out on predicting winner's bracket, by the way, because we didn't know what the schedule was. I blame lolesports.com for that particular blunder. But at least we had predictions for the first round there. And yeah, CLG versus TSM, it goes the full 3 games. Michon Aphelios is great in game number 1 and does take that one game for CLG. But yeah, it really feels like they kind of fell apart there. And I gotta specifically say, my prediction for the series ends up being completely wrong, right? I really read Jenkins being able to withstand that pressure focused towards topside that TSM had played through for a lot of the year. But I think in games 2 and 3 especially, Jenkins kind of crumbles there a little bit. He really struggles on the Cho'Gath in game number 2, and then in game number 3, his Rumble looks uncharacteristically poor. Copy really struggles on that Cho'Gath as well, so almost looking like CLG as a whole has to pay a visit back to that pick in particular. Yeah, and they just can't get things going in those second couple of games. Really, really did feel like, yeah, props are given to TSM. I think Neo and Dragku in particular on the Xayah Rakan are big standouts for that team, but it really did seem like it felt uncharacteristic from CLG. Maybe that's just me overrating them, though.
And in retrospect, one could say that TSM, given where they are currently, are both in a meta and in a situation regarding their players and how they're operating, that they perhaps are like the one angle that could have taken CLG down here in this first round. The fact that Hanser did so well in games back to back to back, I think really speaks to the fact that this is a roster that could play through topside if they need to, while still having a very, very stable bot in the form of Neo and Drag, who kind of overperforming in a way on that Xayah Rakan pick, like you're talking about, going for it every single one of these 3 games. But yeah, because CLG is in a position where they have to rely so heavily on Jenkins in a lot of cases, and TSM has all of a sudden found a contingency plan back bot, it's not only the case that Hanser pops off, it's also the case that now Neo and Dragku have their footing, and from there, I guess it makes sense, and I think it was a very deserved series at the end of the day that TSM walked away with.
And even though I'm glad that it paid off, like I thought it was going to go for, like it's the series that I think a lot of good situations came together for TSM, because first of all, and I think the biggest glaring problem for me with CLG, it's mid lane. Doxa, you know that he's going to be the weakest player on the team, and the amount of attention or pressure that I think they committed there was so negligible. Even in the first game that they won, I don't think they did that much to attack Doxa, and it just feels like you're not actually committing to attacking the weakest player in the team. Then, if you allow for this to happen in Copy, I don't think Copy had a particularly good series, but it also falls into their mid jungle dude to try and be able to commit something there, but it felt so weak. They just gave so much room for TSM to exist because nobody attacked Doxa that much. And then the point that I thought was going to be winning for TSM, which was top lane with the commitment from Spence Karen, they were also playing quite heavily with tanks though. So like, even though I do like that they committed to that, it also helped with the fact that you're committing to top lane, but your bot lane is playing it for 3 games, by the way. Like a bot lane that is so safe that as long as you don't commit any major errors, they should be able to come out and play the game. So I feel like there were so many factors that at the end allowed for TSM to win. And a lot of that comes in from, I think, CLG dropping the ball both in game and in draft because they allowed so much space for the bot lane from TSM. And then, like, Jenkins was the point that we thought could work out to deny Hunter, but I also thought Hunter was going to be able to deliver. So I'm glad that Hunter is still performing like one of the top laners in the league.
Yeah, absolutely here. Yeah, I completely agree on the read on copy there. You know, he has a good Gragas game in game number 1, but guys, LeBlanc and his Cho'Gath especially, I think, look pretty weak. I think his Cho'Gath game, he's just, I don't know, just doesn't seem to be able to find the angles that you need to on Cho'Gath. He like goes over aggressive in a few parts, goes under aggressive in some other parts, and is just really getting beaten on by Neo and Doxa in that game in particular. I mean, yeah, Doxa deserves like some credit, it feels like, but I do agree, it definitely felt like mid lane was left alone on an island throughout a lot of this series, and especially in game 2, like Heavy just cannot come up and represent. But I think we can move on to talking about our 3-game series, at least. I think the only 3-game series on the top side is TL Challengers up against Wildcard Gaming. Yeah. TL does manage to turn it around from where it originally was here, at least from where it was at the end of the regular season, where Wildcard did win that head-to-head 2-1. TL turns it back around and wins it 2-1 here in the series that really matters.
And, you know, they also turned it around for what some people would call a reverse sweep. I know, Gordo, we talked about this a little bit on the co-stream. Can a best 3 be a reverse sweep? Well, people have been using the language on Twitter at the very least. And it was a banger of a series, you know. Wildcard coming out in that first game swing. They got Musader on the Garen, and it really looked like they had the momentum to take it. In general, their draft was something that I think really stood out to me in that first game. They had the Gragas mid for Soligo, really big facilitator. Not a whole lot of gold being funneled towards them, but still, you're doing so much off of that Aroa and the Seraph's Embrace that you're just blowing people up in team fights, or at the very least, enabling Lens and company to blow people up in team fights. And I really like the Karthus as well, just really hammering in the damage all over the place, forcing a lot of rough calls from TL Challengers, and I think that they just folded in a relatively passive manner after they realized that this game was kind of over. That being said, they stored themselves up well, they recouped, and they come back with 2 big games. Massive carry performance in particular for Arrow down bot side of the map on that Jinx that they favored throughout all the games in this series. 12-0-5 in that second one, really just kind of popping off, showing that, hey, some of these hyper carries like the Jinx, they could still stand up to these new kids on the block like the Zeri that was coming through for Lens.
Yeah, a great Draven game by Lens as well in that final game. I really thought Wildcard were going to manage to take it when they start getting some of those big shutdowns and big cash outs onto Lens's Draven, but it you know, just a couple of crucial team fights end up turning it back around. I think Mir and Bradley especially like did a great job in the series as a whole, but especially in that final game of just finding the key targets to really be able to section off from Wildcard and end up taking the game.
And it felt like for the first time some of the other members were finally stepping up for like TLC to be able to deliver, because like we've been saying so far this season, I felt like it was such a mid-centric team that they were not doing a lot. I feel like this was the first time that we could see the other members trying to accompany their mid lane APA and finally provide some support for them. I like particularly that, like Nyarko was saying, I really like Arrow's games this series particularly. I feel like he was trying to really step up to the AD carry stereotype that is the hyper carry for later stages, but it feels like it works better for Arrow in that regard. Like, even though his Raven is one of like the staples for him, I like the Jinx game so much. Like, I think he probably sticking to much more of those traditional hyper carries would probably work out a little bit better for TLC. The only issue that I'm worried about them, and something that I think we saw a little bit later, is that I feel like they are going to be a little too reliant on playing for late game carries and late game kind of comps. Uh, and there's teams here that can put the pressure on you on the early stages of the game, which makes it really hard to be able to pull off this sort of comps.
Yeah, I really think my call coming into this playoffs, right, was that at some point Bradley was going to kind of wake up and be that 1v1 guy that I would really expect from him. You know, he was like a big carry-centric player last year especially. And this team, you know, feels like it was kind of built to play through top. But is Bradley just a tank guy now? I mean, he comes out with the Malphite and the Scion. I think his Scion's really good, by the way. Like, I think he can find some really good unstoppable onslaught angles that not a lot of other top laners are finding. You know, I think that's a big part of their game number 3 performance. But I don't know, it's just a big change of pace for him. Although I will say, like, Mir's Lee Sin is everything that was promised, by the way. Like, I think he has some sick Lee Sin games over this weekend, and I think that, along with the always solid performance from Arrow, is also a big part of what puts them over the edge.
It's kind of the issue that I think now we're going to see with Bradley. It's that, well, it makes it so that his issues before, that we had a little bit more of a potential to carry top lane with the Jax and the Fioras, are not shown, because now with things like your duties are a little bit easier to pull off, thanks to the fact that it's much like consistent how you commit as a tank, and you don't die as easily as a Jax or if you're a would. But it also feels like, well, he's forced to that spot with the way that the meta is. But for the team, probably works out better, because if Bradley doesn't die, it makes it so that the rest of the team can be a little bit more together, if that makes sense. Like, when Bradley is by himself or apart from the team, it feels like there's a major disconnect with everyone else. But if Bradley, as the soul tank, can stay alive with the rest of the team, it feels like at least they're a much more cohesive unit. Like, obviously don't want to spoil or anything like that, but one thing that I really liked, for example, was the Sejuani game against C9C. I think that he made some really good moves with a team. And I think that that connects really well with the idea that feels like if Bradley is with the unit works well. If Bradley isn't, they feel a little bit too separated as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that pairs well nicely with, you know, you think about who else needs to get fights started on this team. It's still the still relatively inexperienced Kim Down, right? Who, well, I think has had some very solid Nautilus and Thresh games in there. Is still, you know, he doesn't necessarily have the experience that you want from always getting the perfect angles in these team fights. And, you know, I think Mir's a lot more of a carry guy as well. Don't get me wrong. I think he's had some good Vi games and stuff where it's like, you know, how can you not engage fights on the Vi? But now that he's playing stuff like the Viego, like the Lee Sin a lot more, I think having Bradley on that primary engage source starts to become a lot more important for TL. And it's going to be something I'm going to keep an eye on going forwards as, you know, as I said earlier, I do think Bradley's just kind of supportive tank guy now. You know, he plays 2 games of Locket Sejuani against Cloud9 as well, which I guess is as good a segue as any to start talking about the winners bracket a little bit more. All the other first round series are 2-0 sweeps. I don't think we need to spend too much time on those.
What we expected.
Yeah, unless you guys want to pull back to any of those. But I think, you know what? Go back to the last episode, listen to our predictions. We're right about pretty much every single one, except, yeah, I think I called that maybe TL First would take a game, and they certainly did not. But other than that, it was just sweeps across the board. So, talking about the winners bracket, Cincinnati Fear versus Golden Guardians Challengers really comes down to the wire. We get to see a singed game, the rare and dangerous singed, come out of concept to close out that series. Maybe a little bit on the disappointing side, as we don't really get to see the same style that was played by Golden Guardians throughout the evening, but this is like a big Array versus Minwi who can hard carry more series. And, you know, like, Array is so close to taking this one over the edge, right? Like, it's a disaster that he doesn't really manage to get there in game number 2, and then he just doesn't have the comp for it. It feels like in game number 3.
Yeah, Gordo, I think you get really down to the meat of it pretty quickly here by talking about that bot lane matchup, Minui versus Array. And I mean, it was a wild time all around because we had some interesting draft decisions being made by both sides throughout the entirety of this best of 3. But when it came down to it, in this first time we're really starting to see endurance becoming a big aspect of how these teams plays, Cincinnati Fear pulled it off because I think that they were just able to dedicate a little bit more manpower down to the side of Minui when needed. And on the other hand, we saw kind of like a splitting across the board from challengers. In particular, the fact that Young had to kind of put the carry eyebrows on for the Talia just didn't sit right with me, because Concept Topside was basically a non-entity once it kind of came down to the fact that the Singed wasn't disrupting like they needed to. So I mean, in the battle of the AD carries, I don't even necessarily think Minui is straight up better than Array, but Array just, I think, were put into a lot more awkward positions, and as a whole, it makes sense that Fear took the series 2-1.
On one part, I'm glad for Fear. I just hate so much that it goes against my prediction, but Fear pulled it off at the end really well. I just dislike the last game so much for GG, because like you're pointing out, they go for Young to play the Talia, which in and of itself it's not bad, but it feels like Talia has a certain condition that unless your silence are way stronger than your opponent's silence, they don't really find a lot of value comparatively. And on the side of Array, yeah, he was essentially going against a hyper carry who can carry more between the other. Aphelios is Aphelios, so it's a little bit harder, but it was a competition. But between Concept and Faisal, it was just doomed, because the Singe wasn't doing anything meaningful in that game. And the weirdest thing to me is that I don't is Singe now considered a counter to, I think it was a Sion, no? Is Singe considered a counter to Sion in any way? What really does he do that can mess up the Sion? And even if you kill him in lane once, does that even matter? Like, oh.
Yeah, that's a great point, TDS, actually, because I mean, what stands out in my memory, like my big memory of this Singed versus Sion game, is there's a moment in the game where Concept is like proxy farming. He's like he's in between like the tier 2 and the inhibitor turret on the enemy side of the map, because he knows that Parry's bot side, and he's like catching waves, and he's trying to proxy farm against the Sion, and Sion just walks up to the outer turret with like 1 minion left and just takes the outer turret while he's trying to proxy farm. Like,
it's just, and then you can even argue Sion can do the same thing. He can just walk and like, who's gonna kill him? Great. Like, I don't have answers for that, and then it messes up everything from GG.
Yeah, I mean, especially after watching Maryville once again trying to push through the playoff bracket for the NACL qualifiers, I'm now convinced any champion proxy farm, and therefore Singed literally has 0 role anymore. You want a disruptive tank? Go like Sejuani top. Heck, go like Wukong. You could probably build them tank and still have more utility, right? If you want like this like burn down during team fights and just being a nuisance, there's also a whole lot of things that you could select given how the current meta is shifting. I mean, heck, they could have passed the Cho'Gath test. I don't know if it was banned that game or something, but just regardless, it was an odd choice for sure, and I think it led to a very awkward game number 3 and kind of a wet squib of an end to what was a banger series.
Yeah, it was banned. It was, yeah, the Cho'Gath was banned by Fear, but I don't think that's an excuse, though. I mean, like, there's a lot of champions in League of Legends, guys. You don't need to play the Singed.
Like, I like the fact that they did attack the pool of top laners, which could have like messed around a little bit, but like it feels like people forget Ornn exists when he's still a tank you can play, and he does essentially the same that any other tank, but gives extra stats to your champions. Like it just feels like, do people really, is it Senna syndrome where Senna is not bad, but people are just so away, they don't want anything to do with Senna that they don't pick the champion, or Seraphine. Like, it's just something that surprises me with that. But at the end, like, the issue is that because you go for something like that, your Talia now is useless, because she's not only the sole AP damage dealer of the team, if I'm not wrong there, she's the sole AP damage dealer of the team, because realistically the Singe is not going to accomplish that much with damage. And then you have no side lane pressure because the Singe will not do anything in side lane. So you're essentially with a worst 5v5 comp and trying to have your best player, Young, carry with Thalia. And I'm like, why do you want to shoot yourself in the foot? By the way, full credit to whoever drafted for Fear, because I feel like that goes unnoticed, but all around Fear's drafts from start to finish have been top notch. I like there's maybe one here in between in the regular season that you can say, but from start to finish, whoever is doing the prep for Fear and the drafts for Fear, amazing job. I think that Fear is one of the most consistent and better drafted teams.
And I don't want to stay on this point for too much longer because TDS, I think you've really hit the nail on the head regarding the Singe pitch just being baffling. But just to add on to it, as the consummate Talia lover, you know, you could have just gone Renekton top, guys, and then you have like a chain CC to set up WE combo on Talia. She could carry a little bit harder. And the other thing is, the reason why this Talia was selected is because it's up against the Veigar. They just kind of wanted to go push and roam early, but now you have a Singe top who doesn't exactly exude kill pressure into something, especially like a Scion. So that was super awkward as well. Overall, just disappointing. There were like signs of brilliance because once again, it isn't like Golden Guardians played bad in the last game. I called them the carry eyebrows, and I'll say it again. You know, that Talia for Young really was really good, but it's just sad. And then you have to look back bot and just realize, you know, Array has been putting their all into these 3 games. Eventually, you're going to start seeing some amount of weakness, and it wasn't even like they played poorly either. It's just kind of tragic that this is how Golden Guardians get knocked down, but they're only knocked down, not knocked out, and that's something to keep in mind.
For sure. One more point to finish out this series is I do got to give props to Perry again, man. The guy is clutch. I think he really stepped up this week in a big way. He looks absolutely fantastic in their series 1.
Top 3 jungles.
Yeah, which is against... yeah, I agree on top 3 junglers, by the way. I had him on my list there. And yeah, he's absolutely fantastic in their first series against Evil Geniuses, and he's very good here as well. I think especially in that game 2, you know, that's a neck and neck game. It's really about Minwee versus Array, and Perry is the one who like threads the needle, finds the Glacial Prison onto Array with the ultimate down, sets up for Trevor to land the follow-up hook, and that's what ends the game. I mean, that game could have gone the other way if that play doesn't happen, and Perry's the guy who finds it. He lands the Glacial Prison through 3 frontliners. You know, Rosethorn, Concept, and Prismal all could have blocked it, and Perry gets it.
It really, like, Perry has been really like one of the best junglers and consistently showing up. I just wanted to ask, like, with this, Fear is pretty much set, right? They essentially secured like top 2 spots for provisionals, right?
It's very hard for them to lose it here because if they can't, even if they lose their next round, they will drop to, like, they're locked top 6 or they're locked top 8 with this.
I think they get it actually, because like even if AoE and Wildcard win, one of them gets eliminated in the next one because they go against each other. So like
that's true. You're right. You're right.
It. They are top 2 100%. So they not only already secured like top 6, they already did what they needed to do for the season. Like the season is done for them in that way, not like literally. But they already saved.
And I know that we have the FlyQuest and Dignitas game to talk about, but this is a really quick segue to build off of the point about provisional teams. You know, I want to look back down at the bottom bracket really quick and just say, you know, CLG Faith, they got their win, but that also means that at one point in time, Wildcard was literally 1 game away from being relegated before CLG Faith, which is just bizarre to think about given the way that the regular season played out. I don't know how I feel about this format. It also really does suck that Wildcard and AoE are going to have to make that playoff, and therefore Fear is locked. That being said, between the 2 of them, I think we're all going to be pretty confident in the fantasy bracket phase that we have coming up that it's going to be AoE dropping. But at the end of the day, it's just so strange that this is how things played out. I honestly think we're kind of lucky that we had 4 clear teams in the provisionals that were like below these other 2 provisional teams.
Yeah, on the subject of format, I do think we relegate probably a few too many teams. If you think about it, like it reminds me a lot of early LCS, right? Because when the LCS first started, if anybody is not ancient enough to know, the uh, the setup was there were 8 teams and 4 of them got relegated. Sort of 2 playoff teams got relegated in the LCS back at the very beginning, and that cut down to 3 and then eventually 2, if I recall correctly. And I think something similar is probably going to happen here because the response might be, oh, but there's 16 teams, so it's okay to relegate 4, but only 6 are eligible for relegation. So really, it's like we're relegating 4 of 6, which is quite a large number. I do think it's okay for now, give it a year to be at relegating 4, specifically because half of the slots were given away for free to whoever wanted them. Really, all of the slots were given away for free, I suppose, but half of them were given to LCS teams who had no history of fielding, or very limited history of fielding challenger teams, or amateur teams, rather. And I think that showed here in this losers bracket, right, where all 3 of them get eliminated bottom 4 right away.
So I feel like for the format, I would really like you're saying, I think 4 is too much. I would like 2 that are up for grabs, and the last one is direct. Because I think that last place should be direct, just because I do think that last place it's last place. Like there should be a punishment for being last place, sadly. But the other 2 should be relegation, in the relegation tournament, like they are kind of doing right now. So I feel like that would at least feel a little bit more consistent, and it would still give credit to the top teams, because top 2 is really hard. Like Fear's accomplishment, I think should be much more celebrated, because it's not only the fact that they achieved top 2, but they achieved top 2 by beating an NACL team and doing so consistently. But it's when you think about it, it's not easy, because they essentially had to go through top teams to be able to do it, and do it in a consistent manner as well. I just feel like it's hard for it to happen, and Fear made it look kind of easy to a certain degree when it's hard.
Man, I really wish that we could somehow relegate the LCS bounded teams instead of having provisionals. Mostly because I want to see this EG roster get relegated, but also beyond that, I think that we're in a weird spot where, yes, it is the case that given there's only 6 provisional teams, for them getting relegated seems pretty extreme. But at the same time, for the overarching 16 teams, I kind of wish that we could keep 4 relegation slots, right? Because that's, in my opinion, enough upward mobility for us to constantly be focusing on the amateur scene and the qualifier scene. Right now, I think that's one of the most exciting parts about the NA League of Legends world right now. It's the fact that there is a lot of discourse about quals and a lot of people training their eyes on that. So with all that in mind, if there was some way to kind of adjust, reconnoiter, keep the 16 teams with 4 relegation slots, I would love to see that. But it is a real feels bad, especially for the AoE wildcard duel that we have coming up.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Before we get fully into lower bracket, I do want to round out our upper bracket and talk a little bit about Dig Challengers up against FlyQuest Challengers. I'm gonna be explicit about it. Fly Challengers should have won this series, man. This was their series to win. Yuji deserved to win this series. They are ahead in all 3 games. They snowballed successfully to a victory in game number 1, especially off the back of a great Vygar game from Spyrax. And then games 2 and 3 are decided by the freaking Aurelion Soul, dude. It is so strong in these mega late game scenarios. And props to Dignitas for doing just enough to keep themselves in it and keep that ASOL scaling. But damn, dude, XU really getting out jungled by Yuji this series, and Yuji coming so close to taking it home.
It really does suck that we didn't get to do the second round winners on our bracket for the first week of playoffs, because man, I would have said that I thought FlyQuest was going to take this 2-1 even last week. This team is hot, and they continue to show that they're hot here. This is one of the best looks I've seen from them. And yeah, they're up against Dignitas, which is just rough bracket luck. But the fact that Yuji, who, once again, I put them as #1 jungler the entirety of the NACL, popped off the way that they did. I think that this team is just going to slaughter everybody in the lower bracket. And it's going to be a pretty meteoric rise, I think, back towards finals, probably.
I agree. I think FlyQuest, like I already predicted them. I thought they were going to win 2-1 because I don't think that 2-0 was going to be fair against Dixie. And I want to give a huge shout out to Insanity because, yes, even though it was the ASOL that carried the living hell out of those two games, they really shouldn't have been that close or winning though any of those two games. The ASOL really did a lot. Like it's still something you have like to do. Being able to be proactive and good with the ASOL, it's not easy, as we've seen in pro play. So I think that it does merit credit to Insanity for being able to play that effectively. But like with FLYF though, I'm not only surprised with how much they've improved, but it's not only the Winston part. Like Yuji looked like a completely different jungler. Not because he was bad, but like the consistency in those 3 games from Yuji was really great. And I think that that's something that I wasn't expecting from the series. Like I thought FlyQuest would win, but I wasn't expecting their play to come like that. And now with, yes, the lower bracket is a little bit riskier because you can slip up one day and then you're out. I feel like they will like I think I did put them potentially going through the lower bracket so they would eliminate TLC anyway, which I'm sad, but it will happen. And I feel like they are going to run the lower bracket. Like I really expect this to be the grand finals between them and C9C when it comes to it.
Yeah, that actually is my bracket. Available publicly. I tweeted it out. It's also on
Same here.
Cincinnati Fear did that bracket prediction competition thing on Chalong. I don't know how you pronounce that website. But I did do it. My bracket's on there. My bracket's on Twitter as well. I did predict Fly Challengers to lose this series and then beat Dig Challengers in losers finals to make grand finals. And I mean, it feels super doable. Like if this were a best of 5, it feels like FlyQuest could have wised up, banned the Aurelion Sol, and taken it with how on form Yuji was here. I mean, he did have the full download on XU, constantly responding to ganks in the bot side, constantly finding his own ganks wherever necessary. 2 great Lee Sin games there, and even a fantastic Sejuani game. Like going from the full carry Lee Sin mode, where he's trying to get gold into himself and be able to really be that kind of assassin onto spawn, and then switching gears on the Sejuani in that game 3, where he is just so self-sacrificial. You know, he goes down a ton of CS, but he makes it 100% worth it by once again enabling Masu, taking out spawn very early on. And I think like they're so close to winning that game as well. Like they crack an inhibitor, I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, and it goes all the way to like 45 plus minutes. And again, it's just Aurelion Sol diff.
Yep.
Are we on this patch for the rest of the playoffs?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it
Oh
is.
God! So no Aurelion Sol gutting to be had. Unfortunate. Very, very tragic.
This is actually the post Aurelion Sol gut. This was 13.5.
Wait, this
is 13.5.
13.5. Yep.
Yeah, they had 3 days to practice on the patch before playoffs started.
And it's
It
still
just
this
shows-
good. That's so stupid. I hate this champ.
Yeah, that's actually the worst part of it, right? Is that this is post nerf ASOL. That's the reason it's getting through pick and ban.
I love it so much though. I enjoy Aurelion Sol a lot. Now, even though it messed up my prediction, I still love it so much. I'm glad. I think I tweeted about this, but I'm so happy that the rework happened because it's one of the like most enjoyable things I've played in League for a while. So great.
I do kind of like it too. Like I think it's a little too strong probably, but I kind of like the design as a whole though. Like I like having a hyper scaling pick that isn't like Vigar Kassadin, because it feels like they just don't fulfill that fantasy the way that ASOL does. So I think he's a cool way of capturing that, and he's a nice addition to the hyper carry mid lane roster. Maybe once he gets tweaked a little bit more.
God bless the meteor, by the way. Top-notch ability.
Oh yeah, it's very flashy. It's very cool. It's good. It's fun to cast. It's fun to watch. Can't deny that one.
unless you're an ED.
Between that and the Winter Blessed Diana skin and that one Pike skin where if you get the Penta, everything goes black. You would imagine they'd be able to bring back, the seasonal rift or something like that, given how much they're impacting the map now. But, it may have been a few too many months late for me to actually make this point with any amount of impact. Next year, though, Riot, next year.
Is this a Reddit Riot Please thread in my podcast that I'm hearing here in Nyarko?
While we're at it, can we revert to Leah and not rework Rel? And also make sure you don't touch my boy Tarek. Thank you.
And remove Yumi and, what else is there?
Actually, I have a 4,000 word document about how Yumi should be reworked, alongside some very crudely drawn MS Paint illustrations of what the abilities should look like.
All right. Well, one more point on this. FlyQuest Dignitas series. I think Philip, at least for the first two games, really comes alive in this series. I think he holds his own against Hoon fantastically. We called it out last week. Like, Hoon's the best laning top laner in the NACL. I think Fake God's better all around. But Hoon has the better laning stats. I mean, he builds bigger leads. He gets more solo kills. I just think he's better in the one-on-one. And I think he's the best in the one-on-one in the league. And Philip holds his own here very nicely. Plays the Fiora counterpick into the Cho'Gath pretty effectively. Has a pretty solid laning phase. Has the Scion into the Rumble, which we've seen, especially this is buffed Rumble, right? And a lot of players have been struggling in that matchup on this patch. Kind of falls apart a little bit in game number 5, but then again, he is playing frontline in this game that they end up losing. So, I mean, props to Philip here. I think, he's had an underwhelming split versus what we thought he would be like coming back down from LCS. But looks great in this series.
I will add a quick thing. I actually thought that Hoon was, even though Baldwin still's looking kind of iffy from Dixie, I think Hoon is going to have a hard time with the remaining top laners, if I'm honest. It feels like I'm not confident that Hoon is going to be able to perform against any of them, because I think that Philip just had his number in all the series. I feel like a lot of that was Hoon being valuable later on in the game, more so than in lane, and it kind of surprises me how ineffective Hoon felt overall. But maybe it's just that Philip did that well, because it just felt like Hoon was ineffective and surprising and not that useful comparatively.
Fair enough. I don't know. I just felt like this was I think in lane Philip held his own pretty nicely. I think given what I've seen throughout most of this season, I expect Hoon. I expect better out of Hoon. So maybe a little underperformance from him, maybe a little overperformance from Philip. I choose to lean towards the latter, just because I want to give some props to my boy up in the top lane.
That's fair.
Let's move on to the losers bracket, where we are saying goodbye to 4 teams. So want to go series by series here and at least highlight the teams getting eliminated. Starting off on CLG Faith versus Wildcard. We talked about this one a little bit already. And I just want to start things off by saying I made a commitment to myself when the NACL playoffs started. I was sitting down to watch my VODs because I couldn't watch it live. I was doing NACL queue stuff. I sat down to watch my VODs and I made a commitment you know what? I'm going to try to look at all of these teams through a fresh lens, right? I'm going to try to at least semi-separate away what I've seen throughout the regular season and say, okay, now the pressure's on. Let's reevaluate these teams from scratch and see what my thoughts are. And I watched CLG Faith play against Cloud9, and my first note on my sheet is, God, this team looks bad. They are just giving away leads to Cloud9 in that first series. They explicitly look like they do not know what Xayah Feathers do. They're just wandering into Blade Callers for free and giving free kills over to Lost. That was a very rough series, perhaps one of the rougher series we've seen out of CLG Faith. And then they come back and they beat Wildcard in a game. So let's go, boys. Great turnaround there. Great highlight game from NXI. This is what he's been trying to do all season and has only successfully done once against FlyFam. And, they put it together here against Wildcard.
It's been a tough split for me, you know, as a CLG Faith fan, as one of, I imagine, like 4. I don't know. I don't get much engagement on my CLG fandom posts on Twitter, which kind of indicates to me that not a whole lot of people are on my side. Also, I was just getting perma-clowned in Twitch chat during the wildcard series, which was rough to have to deal with. But you know, I held the faith. They got the game off of wildcard, and that means that I was theoretically right in my massive bet hedging during the first bracket that we created. But no, Gordo, you're right. The team looks bad. They definitely stepped it up. I think that games 1 and 3 looked substantially better in the wildcard series than anything they managed during their games against C9. Also, anything they managed in like the back half of the regular season. I mean, like I think I said it before on podcast, or at least I said it on the co-stream. But Arlint and I, the head coach of Contingent Esports, were practice casting a game, and we decided to do CLG Faith versus TL first, and it was just one of the most shambolic experiences I've ever had in the booth. It's just a team that, in a lot of cases, were running it down proverbially when it comes to their macro shot calling, but also in terms of their individual laning prowess. I think that both were somewhat cleaned up for the wild card matchup. Bijani came alive in that first game and honestly held on a lot better in the following matches than I thought he would, especially as I have for a while now. I've been trying to crown, or I don't know the opposite of crown, dethrone. But he's on the throne of like worst top laner in NACL. You know, I'm trying to dethrone him from that front. But you know, this is to say that, you know, he looked a little bit better there. It's just, it's just sad. NXI though, right at the end here, coming through, kind of being the best player of the team, the Elmer's glue that held the ramshackle hut of popsicle sticks together just a little bit longer for them to finally get a second win here. Shout outs to the 32, what is it, 2 and 32 Giga Chad copy pasta that was being flooded in Twitch chat. But you know, they did it. One more dub before being brought out, so we'll see how they do in relegations. But you know, I just wanted to give my little vigil here because I do love these guys, and for as bad as they look, Gordo, the fact he looked at them with a fresh lens, I was looking at them with rose-colored glasses, and I'm nostalgic now for their plays.
You'll get a chance to see them soon enough, so it's not like you will be missing them for too much. And hey, if you're a fan of a team, through thick or thin, you have to go with them. Like I just watched my team today get eliminated from international competition, so I understand the pain. But hey, we have to go through all those things as hard as they get. Now, I do think though that CLG Faith, for how like bad they've been in a lot of the stretches of the season, this probably was the first instance I could legitimately say, okay, they actually improved in some stuff, and that's a positive sign because realistically, you may be the worst of the NACL, but you just need to be better than the competition that will try and dethrone you from NACL. So it's not like it's the end. Realistically, they just need to be better than the ones below them. They don't need to be better than the ones above them, because you can always get towards the relegation tournament, but as long as you don't get relegated, that's all that matters at the end of the day. So I feel like CLG Faith is still could potentially save plays. I feel the same for almost every other team because I do think that there's not a lot of teams that I would say can try and pull down one of the provisional teams from NCL. Like I still think that there's like the step up that you need to do is not that high, but there's still a step up that you need to pull off. So I'm kind of like still waiting to see if there's any like NACLQ teams that I would be thinking could do it. But honestly, from the professional teams, I think CLGF is one that I'm beginning to have maybe this little bit much more confidence in for surviving.
I don't know if they can keep it up for the relegation tournament. That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to tell from the sample size of one final desperate best of 3 if they actually improved because, you know, there wasn't that much time or space between the C9 series and this series, right? It could just be that they randomly peaked here. And honestly, if we see them in the form that they were in for that first playoff match, or like I said, some of these matches earlier on or later on in the regular season, I think that these guys get clapped by like everybody in the NACL qualifiers from rock bottom up. That's my honest call on this. It's sad, but perhaps true. Maybe it's the fact that all these qual teams are like playing against one another, and therefore I can't really see what their ceiling is. But I don't know. I'm losing faith. I'm losing my religion. It's very, very sad.
To be fair, Rock Bottom is a team in the NACL queues. Nyarko isn't that low on CLG Faith that he thinks literally every team can beat them. Rock Bottom is the name of an org. They have a pretty solid roster, actually.
Maybe I'm the more positive one of the three. Like I don't think that it's that bad, but it's bad. But it's not that bad. But it's
I want to personally at least highlight at least one player from each of these teams that I think has a shot to maybe go somewhere better as they get eliminated and relegated. And I think on this team, I think it's Aaron. I think Aaron has looked really good. I've liked his, at least it looked really good for a CLG Faith player. I think he's had some solid laning performances. I'm kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm being too harsh on NXI for playing all of these carry-focused junglers and having no team around him. But picking from these 5 guys, I think Aaron is my favorite looking forward into future splits.
I think that's fair. I would go NXI just because like I understand for a jungler, and this is something, and this the reason why I literally said CLG Fate we're not going to do anything this split. You need to have good laners to really provide for you in a lot of those instances. And NXI had to work with Charcoal a lot of the splits. So like it's really difficult to be able to pull himself out. And I think that he had 4 like not necessarily stellar performances, but he was a lot of what CLG Faith could ever try and accomplish doing until the changes in some of the players. So I really think that he deserves an opportunity with one of the higher up teams. And there's junglers that will go higher up. I think after this NACL split. So I hope that he gets an opportunity with those other NACL teams.
Fair enough. Well, let's move on to the next series. AoE Gold versus Evil Geniuses Challengers, where Evil Geniuses, the team that I predicted to win the split at the beginning, becomes the first Challengers team to be eliminated from Spring. Wow, what a collapse here for EG as they bow out here.
Do we dub this the biggest train wreck in like Academy for a while? Like I wouldn't even say just NACL Academy.
Yeah, it's got to be up there, right? And it's, I have to jump right to excuses, right? Because I can't write off these 5 players. I can write off some of these players, maybe. But I can't write off, first of all, I think mobility looked better than expected, so you can't even blame the substitution here, because this team is supposed to have King. God knows when, but they're supposed to have King at some point. But yeah, it just never comes together, I think, and the more I think about it, the more, and maybe this is just a Cope take, it really just, sometimes a team of 5 players doesn't really gel, so, maybe it is just that, but I think also there's something to be said about not being able to find a groove with what is supposed to be a temporary roster, right? So they start off this season with 2 subs with Robbie Bob and mobility, and then they carry on, and it's you're scrimming day in, day out with mobility for the entire season, but in theory, King is right around the corner the whole way through, so you kind of get this mental check that, oh, well, it still doesn't count yet because we don't have our real roster. And then perhaps by the time you realize you're never going to get a real roster and this is your real roster, it's a little bit too late. And then you have a coaching change in there as well. So maybe a little bit of that hits them here. The other thing that I'd say is it actually felt like there was one week where they really did have an identity, right? They get more wins than in any other week. I think it was the last week with Robbie Bob, right? They really hit their stride where they're playing these Lissandra and Galio comps with Shaden on carries like the Viego and the Kindred, and that was their way of winning, and they look really good that week. And then Ryoma comes in and he doesn't really play those picks, and they have to find a whole new identity again, and then they never really find it. So, maybe that factors in a little bit as well.
Yeah, and Gordo, we called that episode Shaden's Big Week. We had a whole titular thing for
It's
him.
his only big week.
No, ever since he's been looking really big week, if you know what I'm saying, man. it's been a rough one for these
Ah.
guys. Just bad decisions, I think, from Shaden, and I think some of that does come from the fact that we've been really emphasizing the mid jungle continuity as a signifier of a big top team, and maybe they just had the coordination shaken up when Ryoma came in, right? But I mean, even this deep on into the splits, the fact that they haven't been able to find their footing is pretty depressing. And this is a deserved placement for them, I think, as tragic as it is, Gordo, because I think I was the other EG supporter early on in this one. But, at the very least, we collectively as a Salt Mine called that a collapse was going to happen for one of these teams, and it just happens to be EG.
Yeah, like maybe they could beat an Immortals challengers or something if they ended up playing against each other, but I mean, that's not how the bracket shakes out, and that's not really an excuse you get to feel better about yourself at this stage.
And honestly, I think Immortals doesn't look terrible. I think that this is actually one of the few teams that's been like trending upwards as of late. I don't know if it's like enough to like bust them out of their current placements, but I don't think that they look terrible. We'll get into those series though in a bit, I bet.
It feels like this is the best opportunity also with every drama that you could say, oh, but behind the scenes, maybe something is happening with AG since there's a lot of drama around him, so could make an argument for that. But realistically, EGC is the team that I don't think I could excuse for anything. Same with, like, because I did know that there was someone that was, like, we call it out. Someone is gonna crash and burn. I thought it was going to be FlyQuest C, and I hate them for not pulling off because my predictions. But like the amount of talent, I like that seemed so bad. But like the talent that was in EGC is good talent. It's not talent like it hasn't been at least taken towards the LCS to a certain degree. Yes, mobility is there, but like you don't need to be the best team to win against a team that theoretically on paper it's not better than yours. So like you just need to pull up a couple of performances and try and pull it off against a team that theoretically it's not better than yours. And it's not like EGC is incapable of that, but like it feels like there's no semblance of an attempt. And I would be more comparing this to like the kind of train wreck that is PSG. In the sense that this roster has everything in their players to be able to pull off at least a couple of victories here and there. I don't say win it all, but the bare minimum is higher than bottom four. And this bare minimum is really, really bad because it's now like the stocks on all of these players except mobility, because I think that he has no like blame in how it went, should be like this. Like I was here on Soul. Soul is now like this. Shading was probably like this. Now he's here. Ryoma, well, Ryoma is Ryoma. And Smoothie was probably here. He's now like this. Like the stocks on all these players fall down so heavily, and I don't feel like excuses are fair because at least they should be able to win against AoE without taking anything from AoE. They at least, that's the bare minimum I expect from them, should be above them.
Well, and that's the question, right? Is do we see changes to this roster coming into summer? Because it's like, I don't know. I mean, don't get me wrong. Of course, all their stocks fall from a terrible season. Like, it's hard to, that can't really not be the case. But it's like, I'm not really willing to write off any of these players. Like, if I'm the GM of Evil Geniuses, like, the player I'm like now the most willing to like say, all right, I don't think this player is like going to be, a top competitor again, is probably Smoothie. But Smoothie is a support player in a region without very many good support players. Like, I look down at the qualifiers, right, and I'm like, who is the next big support up? Like Rhino is maybe, a guy who deserves another good shot.
Skytech.
Skytech is on AoE. He's not an amateur, right? So, I mean, like, I guess you could grab somebody from a provisional team, yeah. But, like, assuming that you can't just snag provisional team players for your academy team in between splits. Which I mean, you can if you're willing to pay, but it's probably a little tougher. Assuming that they can't snag anybody from provisional teams, because I think like Duo King would be an upgrade too. It's brand risks aside. I think Duokig would probably be an upgrade on paper. I think, Trevor's probably even looks better as well. But, assuming that if you want to get somebody else, you have to get them from a qualifiers team. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know who you would get that's better on paper than where I have Smoothie right now. And it's I don't know. I'm not really willing to write off Soul right now. I do think he's now coming into kind of a prove it split, though. I think Soul and maybe Concept is, I think, in this category a little bit too. Obviously ADD. I think there's a lot of top laners who are kind of coming into prove it splits. Just because it's I think Surdy looks fantastic. I think Faisal looks fantastic. I think I think Moose Hater has kind of put himself on the map. I think Lunacia, given that this was their first experience competitive, looks pretty good. And then we also have Zamudo is on his Korean training arc right now and is going to come back at some point. This next generation of top laners looks crazy good. I still think Porsche is crazy down in NACL queues as well. Not playing in this one, but played in the last qualifier and looked great. There's a real powerful generation of top laners coming up in North America here, and this is a role we have import top laners in NACL. No hate to the individual players there, especially Hoon, who I've praised a lot, but these guys, we should be getting some of these top laners some upward mobility here. And I think people like Soul have their slot at risk just because there's players on a lot of provisional top laners look very, very good, and even some guys outside of provisional look very, very good.
I would hope ADD doesn't stay longer than one split, if I'm honest.
Well, it's Immortals Challengers. They've changed top laners 6 splits in a row, so I think your odds are pretty good, actually.
It would be hilarious if he's the only top laner that they don't change. The worst top laner they have in 6 splits and the one that they don't change. I don't know. I'm not an Immortals manager, I guess.
I'm happy that Gordo brings this up because this is a corrective I've wanted to do for a while here on TSM. The salt mine, obviously. We're still trying to force this acronym to work. But I was saying before, I really think that it is the case that while, yes, we collectively agree that the current NACL class of top laners is weak, the reason why that's the case, the reason why that really feels like it's the case is because there's so many up-and-comers, so many provisional players in the top lane who are really impressive and have shaken things up, I think, really fantastically in this league. So perhaps they aren't at the point right now where we could say, yes, they're exceptionally strong, but they're getting there, and this is going to be a great time to really follow that lane. Next split in particular, I think is going to be a real banger.
Yeah, I didn't mention Shocky either. Shocky, another guy, really exciting. Quackers back in qualifiers too. There's a lot of NA top lane talent, dude. You got to give some of these guys some respect here. I still think Cozy's really good. They're obviously at a lower tier than the Surdys and the Lunacias and the people who are performing in the NACL proper. And I think Zamudo's nuts too, by the way. Zamudo, I think, is going to come back like Thor into Wakanda. He is going to be crushing fools when he gets back here from Korea. As he's been on his training with LS Arc. This is what turned Fudge from an OPL top laner into a NA Academy star. I think Zamudo could very much be on the same path.
And he's NA born, so even better.
True. All right. Well, with that said, we do have one more elimination match that was played, and that was... Why am I forgetting? Oh, there's actually 2 more. I forgot. We didn't even talk about FlyFam IMT Challengers yet. FlyFam IMT Challengers. Immortals is, I think, very competitive for the worst NACL team now that they've lost Balulu, and they still run over FlyFam pretty easily in a couple of games. I think Lunacia in particular disappoints me in this series. He's been somebody that I've really looked at to compete up against some of the challenger players on this FlyFam roster when a lot of the lanes do not appear to be able to do so. But he cannot put it together against ADD in this series. And if he doesn't put it together, I think this team really collapses pretty fast. The Hyper gives them like a little bit of an additional layer, but he gets stuck with the NXI problem, right? Even when he's doing well on Graves in game number 1, every lane's losing, nobody can do anything, and IMT closed it out with one solid team fight.
As our resident man, do I sure love our bottom 2 provisional teams person, as much as I haven't talked about FlyFam to the same degree I talk about Faith. Frustrating series, honestly, for FlyFam. Lunasi, I think, is one of the players that you rightfully pegged as kind of underperforming in these 2 matches, Gordo. But I also got to say, that last game, well, the second of 2 games, it's just rough from the whole team collectively. Yeah. And I think that this is one of the times where we see that like classic full-on bottom of the NACL team collapse. Starting in draft phase, you have the Gragas, right? And you have Instinct stored up against Wixie on Draven. Draven starts popping off relatively early, yet you're building full tank Gragas, and now putting a lot of burden onto a Senna that's just getting absolutely smacked around the map. When I think there's like an argument you go like Roa Gragas here, maybe go for like the Heartsteel Senna even with the Tom Kench on your team and pray something happens there. It just feels that like on that macro level their pivot isn't really working, and then it's just kind of a straight up roll. These lanes all lose. It's a 27-minute game that really felt like FlyFam was choked out in like the first 10 minutes.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I mean, they do lose across the map. This game was doomed pretty much from the first couple of minutes where they start giving up kills in every lane. But I do have to keep on my Lunasi point though. He is on Gragas, the great equalizer, the champion that's supposed to be able to go even in every lane, and he gets Flame Horizoned by ADD. So he loses the hardest for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's a rough performance across the board, and it's also something to be said too for it's like 10 minutes into this game, that, oh, hey, we're getting relegated. How about that? So that's got a tax on your mental a little bit.
You could always be those situations where you're down, like you're out anyway, pretty much. So like, even if they won, which I don't think that it's impossible against the IMT that changed Bolulu from Yusui, their level was still bad, but like with that on paper, like you had better chances. I think they probably will like lose the next one either way. So like they were already kind of in the position where they were going to have to go through relegation anyway, and I think that could have taxed on the players in the sense that, well, we'll try, but if it doesn't work out, it's whatever. Like we already know what situation we're stuck on. Obviously, I have no background information, so this is all speculation, but it feels like that could be the situation, and I don't blame it for that. Like I feel like preparing for the tournament that actually matters to you than this, it's probably a better mentality, since the other one is actually going to impact your future. This not really, apart from if you go like psycho mode and you carry the living hell out of one game, maybe that buys stocks for you or gives you more stocks, and that way you can go higher up to another team. But realistically, if you're playing for permanence, the best you can do is going for the relegation, and I think that may be the idea for FlyFam. For IMT, I have absolutely no hope. I think they are like 2 games away from losing. They go against they're out. They're like GG should 2-0 them like this. Wait, like this. So I have absolutely no hope for them. And I'm really interested in seeing the FlyFam because I do think that the Hyper Edition was better for them. But at the same time, I'm worried. I'm not sure if they are going to be a team that gives you faith, like CLG Faith.
TDS, I'm going to say it. I actually don't think that GG are just going to roll over IMT. I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit more during like the fantasy bracket phase, but they had the worst possible starting matchup, or close to the worst possible starting matchup, having to go against Fly Challengers who, rightfully wrecked them, although still Wixie had a good performance in that first game of that initial best of 3, right? And yeah, maybe 2-0ing FlyFam is basically just the bare minimum expectation. But hey, I mean, Wildcard couldn't 2-0 a team that is ostensibly worse than FlyFam, right? So who's to say at the end of the day? I don't know. I'm still going to put some stock on IMT. I think that they, showed the best possible version of themselves that they could really in the FlyFam matchup. So going forward, I'm excited for this team. I would like to see them make a statement.
We'll stay tuned. Closing out the losers bracket for this week with CLG up against Team Liquid first. Feels like there's not too much to say on this series. I mean, this is the CLG we were expecting to see. They get a much easier opponent to show it up against. But, I think Kevy Viego's back, baby. We talked about it in the preseason, that this guy will pick Viego every time it's up, and he does just that. Has a solid game in game number 1. Has a good Lee Sin in game number 2 as well. Meech is back as well. I think he looks way better on the Zayas and the Aphelioses of the world than he was on the picks like Lucian. I've been saying this all season long. This was not his meta. And now that it is his meta, he's losing to TSM challengers, which is pretty disappointing. But looking pretty good here up against TL first. And I still have some amount of faith that CLG can turn things around and still have a solid losers bracket run.
At the very least, TL First is another, bottom of the barrel provisional team. At least brought us interest, not even necessarily with their performances. There was no pop-off thing to focus on with Surdy this time around, although the Kennen was fun. Shout outs to them for at least trying something a little bit funky with these drafts. Maybe try to catch CLG off guard on that front. I like the Vagar bot both games. That was interesting from LJX. Honestly, kind of felt like they were starting to scale near the end of game number 2, but not in any conceivable way where they were going to be able to punch that gold lead that CLG Challengers was getting. But the flexing from the Jace that was top for Surdy first game, and then Aspect for second game, I think was cool. I don't know. This is another roster alongside CLG Faith where I really hope that they show something more than what they showed during this season during the relegation tournament. And even if they do get relegated, I don't want these teams to blow up. I really enjoy watching these players, and at the very least, kind of like what you were saying earlier, Gordo, there's a chance that these guys will be able to find a home elsewhere, maybe on a team that just gels a little bit better or has some other players that can carry a bit more to help make up the developmental slack that they're currently going through.
Yeah, I will say, I think Surdy is destined for higher things, right? I think he's destined to be on a Challengers roster. Again, in a split where the top lane pool looked relatively weak across the board, I think Surdy stood out as a player that was particularly good. And then Aspect I want to see in the qualifier circuit again in particular. I called this out last episode, and I'm going to stick to my guns here. I think he should be playing in qualifiers before you get into NACL. And Aspect is a player who takes a year off and gets a free pass because he looked pretty good on Prodigies, which, more power to him. Good for him. No hate to the individual player. I just think it's a bad move when building rosters, though. And I think, he has 1 or 2 good-looking games this split, but otherwise is one of our lower-tiered mid laners. And, I don't know, I think you should ask the players to be active in that qualifier circuit before you just throw them into the fire like this. I think it's kind of an unfair situation for him, if anything, to just be taken right up to this level after a year-long break, having never played at the level before.
So I'm all in for Trial of Fire, as you guys know me. So I'm not against the decision from Aspect, especially if it was they approached him and they said, "Yeah, I wanna I wanna go all in." I feel like that's good enough.
No hate to the player. Any player should take the offer when they get it. Yeah, I think it's on the scout and on the team, the GMing.
But I'm also saying for TL, I'm fine if they want to throw the player towards the Trial of Fire. I'm fine on both parts is what I'm trying to say. It's not I'm against it if they want to do. This goes also hand in hand with, if they are going to do it though, they have to know the risks that it brings and the commitment that it needs to bring forward as well. So I hope that if they committed to this, it's because they also are willing to give him a second chance. If TL First stays up and they can still continue, still give him chances. That's what I hope comes forward with Aspect. I will say though, TL First, it's a searchy team, and spice and little bits from Aspect and City Witty sometimes. That's how I see TL First, and if Surdy is not doing the best, then the team doesn't really look that great. And even when he's doing the best, the rest of the team is kind of trying to be there to to provide for more. So I have not a lot of aspirations for Teal first. I do think though that they are from the three lower that are FLYF, CLG, Faith, and Teal first, probably one of the ones or the one that has one of the better chances to stay up, since I think that Surdy has more carry potential compared to the other teams where I'm trying to see who will be their main carry, right? Like that's kind of the main difference that puts Teal first a little bit ahead of them for me.
I really want to see TL first versus TikTok Tony top. We got the two. I don't know how you do you call them franchise top laners, but yeah, I think that's gonna be a really fun clash. So looking forward to that one at the very least, and already excited about relegation. I think that's the way that NACL wanted it, and it's at least paying off on that front. You know, you got two of my favorite teams in the NACL now stuck in this godforsaken tournament.
True. Do we know the format for that, by the way, or not yet?
I mean, not in like a way that's super explicit. Let me see what I can do here. I can try to
Is
bring
it gonna
up.
be a knuckle fight?
Yeah, so
No
I
League
think
of
it. Well,
Legends
yeah,
play.
it's definitely a BO5 format. I would have
Okay,
to
they get
check
chances. Nice.
exactly how they play. It's like, I mean, I think it's a 4-team like double elim bracket or something like that. Let me go and check the
Oh,
rule book
nice.
here.
That's
Actually,
good then.
I'll trim out some dead space here. Let me go and check so that I can just look like I know the answer. After the NACL playoffs, the provisional teams participating in the NACL regular season and NACL playoffs will be ranked by standing. Highest the 4 winning teams. Okay. Here we go. The NACL promotion tournament will consist of the lowest 4 ranked provisional teams playing against the qualifying teams in a double elimination format, featuring best of 3 matches in round 1 of the upper and lower brackets, and best of 5 matches in round 2 of the upper and lower brackets. The 4 winning teams of the round 2 upper and lower brackets promoted teams will qualify for the NACL regular season of the succeeding split.
Okay, so upper bracket will get 2 chances in BO5. Lower bracket
So
will
everybody
get...
starts in upper bracket. So I assume it's high seed
Yeah, no, but I mean like
qualifier
the winners
teams.
of the
Yeah, high seed
winners of the
qualifier
upper
teams
bracket,
up
yeah.
against low seed NACL teams for the first
Okay.
round, and then you play best of 3. So it's like going to be Maryville against CLG Faith or whatever. And then losers move down to losers bracket. Depending on how many upsets there are, you might even have to play a losers bracket match up against another NACL team or something like that, and then you play further rounds until there's only 4 teams left. So 2 wins on the upper bracket gets you into NACL. So, it's a fine format, I suppose. Does mean that everybody doesn't play everybody, but yeah, I think that's just how it is always going to be.
I think it's not want to say the first, because there probably is a fairer way to go for it, but like I still think that if you're like, there should be an incentive to be in NACL in that sense. So like I think that for NACL teams it gives them the best chance, even if you were like in the relegation, the higher seed in the relegation gets the lower seed in that regard and gets a lot of opportunities. And then even if you fall down, you still get 2 chances. So all in all, I'm not against it.
Fair enough. All right, that is going to do it for our recap from last week. So let's chat instead now about how the bracket is going to look for next week. So it's getting a little funky here. It's going to be 4 days again next week. It's going to start with day 1. Is going to be all of the losers bracket games. So I'd say we should start there as well. It's going to be first up. We'll try to run through this a little bit fast because the episode's already going pretty long. We start off with TSM Challengers up against Wildcard.
I think Wildcard's going to 2-1. I don't have faith in them ever cleanly 2-0ing another series throughout the bracket, but I think that they are still a cut above TSM.
Yeah, I am on 2-1 for Wildcard as well. I will never predict 0 losses in a Wildcard series for the rest of this tournament. They've lost that privilege as they drop a game to CLG Faith.
And I'm going to close it out with 2-1 as well for Wildcard. I think that Wildcard, even though they did drop a game, I think TSM should have in them. Once again, Hunter on carrying out one of the series. But like mid lane was, I think that Wildcard will like take advantage of the weak point of TSM. So I'm pretty confident in them taking this to 1.
For sure. All right, moving on. Fly Challengers up against AoE Gold. So I will also call out here, by the way. So one more team gets relegated if one of these provisional teams loses here and the other one wins, then that's the team that gets relegated regardless.
Yeah.
So a big upset by AoE over FlyQuest here, and then a quote-unquote upset, a seeding upset perhaps, by TSM over over Wildcard rather. Would mean that Wildcard's the team that gets relegated and AoE's the team that's safe, despite their regular season standings. With that said, it would require AoE to take down FlyQuest Challengers, a team that I am predicting to make the full lower bracket run. So I don't think that's going to happen. 2-0 FlyQuest.
2-0 FlyQuest for me as well. I just am kind of reminded, Gordo, by Hawk's tweet during the CLG Faith game versus Wildcard, where every single one of these NACLQ teams is just praying on God that Wildcard doesn't bungle it and now have to go play in the relegation tournament. Probably like single-handedly like rolling over all comers. Maybe Maryville has a chance, maybe TikTok Tony Top has a chance, but I mean, while Wildcard has kind of become the poster child for like inconsistent greatness, they still are great. They have great in that part of the title, so yeah, I don't really see that's going to happen, but at least on the AoE side, I am virtually certain that this is going to be the team getting knocked down.
For the record, I almost think it doesn't matter when we're talking about fourth team to get relegated. Obviously it matters, anything can happen once we get to that tournament. But I don't think qualifier teams are that deep. I don't think whether it's AoE or Wildcard, I don't think either of them are at any risk of getting relegated. They're not even going to have to see Maryville. There's, they're going to be up against whoever the 4th seed out of the qualifier is. They're going to be playing against Supernova, who no longer has Hyper, or they're going to be playing against Team Ambition, who no longer has Aaron or Town. The NACLQ pool dries up past the top. I would even say the top 1 team. I don't even think I'm going to be predicting TikTok Tony Top to be very competitive. So I think either of these teams will be fine regardless. So I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world. I think AoE is head and shoulders above the qualifier teams that they would have to play against. But that's getting ahead of ourselves into the relegation tournament. They will be relegated here, though, by FlyQuest.
Yeah, closing it out 2-0 as well for me. Like we were saying, I think FlyQuest will run the bracket through the lower bracket. So it should be a pretty, well, I wouldn't say clean show. I want to give chances to AoE that it won't be clean, but it's 2-0 anyway. And yeah, it doesn't really matter to me who the 4th relegated team is, Wildcard or AoE. I think either of them survive in the relegation tournament. So it's not like I'm that worried about them.
Agreed. It would be a big surprise. Moving on. Golden Guardians Challengers against IMT Challengers. I personally do not share Nyarko's concerns for GG. I think they still showed quite a bit in their last series. I think Array and Young are firing on all cylinders. Yeah, I think IMT, they look good against their FlyFam opponents, but I think they are probably at a lower tier across the board. Maybe if ADD has one of his crazy on-form games. I know we hate on ADD a lot on this podcast, but he's had I think he's had more good games than bad over the last 3 weeks total. Not by a huge amount, maybe it's 60-40. But if he just rolls off a couple great games in a row, I think Concept is somebody you could do that against, especially if he picks Singed. So maybe an outside chance, but I wouldn't predict it. I'm going to be taking Golden Guardians Challengers 2-0.
You already know mine. I'm also on the 2-0 train. I have no hopes for IMT. I will keep myself, I don't like the word hater, but once again, I'm from Latin America. I watched him playing in the Latin America tournament, and I don't like how he played in the LLA. So I don't think that ADD will have a great performance, and I don't think IMT will have a great performance in general. I'm behind Young and Array to hyper carry everything and pull off.
You know what? Screw you guys. I think IMT's taking this over GG.
No.
I'm almost willing to say 2-0 IMT, but that's mostly just because I'm trying to like account for the variance that inherently comes in a best of 3 format where 2-0s can happen even if a team is not definitively, over the course of like multiple BO3s going to consistently 2-0. So on that front, I'll say 2-1, but I really do think that IMT has gotten their wits about them. Obviously, FlyFam is not the biggest opponent to make a statement against early, but I don't know. I think that they really do have the elements to come through and win. And I know this is like a new change in me in recent weeks because I was also an IMT hater, but perhaps it's just like a Wixie's dad buff, and I just see how wholesome that is. But not only do I want them to win, I think that they have an actual decent shot at doing so. They have a good bot lane, and I really think that like GG has, while they exceeded my expectations, still has issues that they have, in my opinion, not really addressed or worked through super well throughout the course of the season.
Yeah, I will say I do think it's Chad's meta, so I think that's a lot of what's making IMT starting to look better. Like I think he really wants to be playing, the Viegos and the Graves and that kind of stuff, and he can do that now more on 13.5. But I think Young is a lot better than Balulu. I also think like Array and Prismal as a duo are a lot better than Wixie and Joey. I think Wixie has been good, but I do think that Array has been like fantastic. I think even in the series that they drop right to even in the series that they drop to
Fear.
To Fear, I think he looks very, very good.
No Balulu anymore, Gordo. I know that like you've been trying.
Did
to
I
ride
say
this
Balulu? No. Not Balulu. I think Young is a lot better than Yusui. I don't think Young is a lot better than Balulu, but I do think he's a lot better than Yusui. So, keeping everything together here. I think Young is better. I think Young is better than current opponent mid laner. I do not necessarily think he's better than other mid laner who may or may not be playing in this series.
We don't know, actually. Like, they could actually
They
just
did run
pull it off
Balulu
and-
for one game because they submitted their roster too late, by the way.
They still lost.
They did still
saying.
lose, but yeah, by the way. So, I already went on my management rant on why you need to get your players subbed out earlier last week, so I'm not going to repeat myself, but I will say, dear God, how is Balulu playing a second week of NACL after already being an LCS, dude? That is unacceptable.
Yep.
Anyway, moving on. Nyarko, you got outvoted. We're moving GG Challengers on in the bracket.
It's okay. We know what happened to TDS this week.
True. Yeah, we've been wrong before, but you get outvoted nonetheless. TL Challengers up against CLG Challengers. This is a tight one, I think.
Yep.
Like I know I just said that I believe in CLG's ability to come back. That's before I realized they're playing TL Challengers. I think I would give it to TL 2-1.
I
don't know. I think that maybe TL they are kind of on the TL first debuff train. CLG's already beaten their sister team, so who knows how TL proper is gonna do, right? No, in all honesty, I think that 2-1 is relatively fair in favor of Team Liquid, but yet again, I find myself kind of on the divergent opinion. I think that CLG, given the fact that we have Kevy playing champions that also are profiting quite nicely in this meta, has a really good shot at this one. Their Lee Sin looked really good versus TL first. They also got the reps in on the Viego as well. Jenkins fully willing to play a bunch of like these like AP-ish top laners. I think Gragas is going to be constantly contested on both sides throughout this upcoming series. But, this is definitely within the wheelhouse of CLG to win. I think that they are well positioned in this meta, and I think that they'll make a statement.
See, isn't Mir just kind of better Kevy at the end of the day? They're both coming in from Osh. They're both way better on these carry-centric picks. They both got a sickly Sin. I think Mir's just looked better overall throughout the season, so I take Mir in that head-to-head.
That's fair. As you can tell, I'm not feeling too strong one way or the other about this one. Maybe it's just my CLG bias, right? Like, I can no longer root for Faith, so sister team it is for me. We'll see what TDS has to say, and if I will finally be able to get a vote that is an advantage this time around.
Well, the logic that I used for TSM was like it wasn't like it was heavily in favor of TSM, right? Like I said, it's probably a 60-40 or 55-45, and I'm not even sure, but like I still believe TSM, and I thought that they had their win conditions. Sadly for CLG, I see it going 2-1 for TLC as well, and the reasoning is going to be similar to TSM in that like bot lane wise, which is one of the weaker potential parts that I could see them taking advantage of, they don't really take advantage of the enemy bot lane that much. So you're not taking advantage of one of the places where you could take advantage of TLC. Top lane, it's going to be kind of neutral. Like we're already seeing Bradley going for the tanks. And then it's going to be the same for CLG. So not like you're going to change that much. And I think that they have an advantage in mid lane because I think APA is better than Kopi. So I am not sure where you really are going to take a lot of advantage of as CLGC. And then even if there's like weird stuff that happens with me or something like that with like Arrow and Kim Down, TLC has been trending towards going for scaling kind of comps, and CLG is not a super early, hyper aggressive, take advantage early kind of team. So I'm not sure that they will find the windows that, for example, we saw C9C take advantage of to try and run down the game on TLC. So I feel like TLC, this is probably going to be one of their most comfortable remaining opponents, because the other one is like if they win, they go against GG Challengers, and I think that that's going to be one of the hardest they are going to have as well. So this is their best chance to qualify. If they don't qualify, I will lose all hope for them, obviously.
Fair enough. So the way the schedule moves on there is we do winners bracket then, along with losers bracket again on the Sunday, and then we get into our best of fives. So let's run through the winners bracket. We're not going to end up missing out on any of the scheduled games this time. So on winner's side, it is going to be Cloud9 Challengers up against Cincinnati Fear in what will be their last best of three for the split.
This is a weird one, right? Because it's sad to say that Fear is probably going to get kind of rolled, but they're kind of going to get rolled, guys, as much as they are kind of the heroes of the provisional teams, and I think still very competitive when they move down to the losers bracket. Move down to the losers bracket, they will. It's unfortunate, but I do think that while Fear is probably going to make a relatively deep bracket run in loser side, it will in fact be on loser side. So C9, they give really no indication that they're letting up their momentum and their growth that they've shown, especially in the back half of the regular season. And I think this team has a pretty solid golden road all the way to the finals.
Yeah, I'm on the same boat here. I just don't see enough chinks in the armor for really there to be any room for anybody to really be predicting against C9 challengers. Like I'm gonna need to see some more poor games out of them in this bracket stage before I start predicting them to not win. And I have yet to see that. Maybe Cincinnati Fear will be the team that shows it, and then maybe that'll mean some interesting things for my winners finals prediction next week. But I haven't seen it yet, and that means I have no reason to doubt that C9 will be able to take it up against Fear.
I'm on the same boat as you guys. It's 2-0 for Cloud9 Challengers, and I think a lot of that has to do that even though Fear did qualify and they did a good job against G, they did get quite a bit exposed in that series. Like I think a lot of that came down to the wire for Fear, and they were able to pull off. But C9C looks like a much better team. I really like Lost in Saisal so far in playoffs. Like I think they've been playing really, really well. Like I think this is the most I've liked from them all split long. They're playing really consistently good. They're putting pressure. They're trying to take advantage, and I think they are really performing to an even higher level than I think they were already doing in the regular split.
Yeah, and they're still playing Lucian Nami too, which like isn't even that good. So imagine them with a real bot lane selection. Like,
win with a real bot lane.
For sure.
I feel that's what Jack Spains actually say all the time whenever it's solo queue, and their bot is now like 0-8 by the end of 14-minute mark. Imagine if I had a real bot lane. Don't even need a real weapon, just other players on my team.
Yeah, that's me in a lot of solo queue games for sure in alt chat. But Moving on, other side of winner's bracket is Dig Challengers up against 100 Challengers.
I'll go first this time. I think it's going to be a 100 Thieves Challengers win 2-1
Ooh.
against Dixie. And the thing is, I feel like how solid they've been with Darshan is actually something I'm not necessarily surprised, but it was a quicker like adaptation than I thought it would be. And it did say that Darshan was going to be like one of the most consistent top laners that you could get to fill up a spot that you needed to fill, and that it wouldn't take that much. And it's looking seamlessly with 100 Thief. And the thing is that if it was FlyQuest here, I would favor FlyQuest. But the one of the advantages that 100 Thieves has over Dixie that I think is going to be really prevalent is bot lane. I feel like Unforgiven and Destiny are going to be able to utilize a really big advantage through bot lane to just win the game. And I don't think that mid lane is going to be that big. If they ban ASO, which I think should come through, or if they have a better plan for ASO, it should work out. And I think it should be a 2-1 in favor of 100 Thieves. Unforgiven is great.
Yeah. And actually, it wasn't in my original bracket, like my pre-tournament bracket, especially because in my pre-tournament bracket, it was CLG here. Because I had, so I'm definitely way doomed on that part of the points calculation for the Cincy Fear contest. But, you know, looking at it now, getting the chance to re-predict on the show, I think I agree with you, TDS. I think I actually would also go 2-1 for 100 Thieves Challengers. And I think a lot of what convinces me, right, is our thoughts when we saw Sniper get subbed out for Darshan is like, Darshan is probably perma-weak sided, which he is a little bit, don't get me wrong. And now this team has to play through bot lane explicitly every single game. But I actually think the 100 Thieves versus TSM series, that was one of the more unforgiven-less series that we've seen from 100 Thieves all split. It's very much about Yukino and Destiny pairing up and moving around the map and just destroying TSM at every opportunity. And Unforgiven is kind of just sitting there doing his AD carry job. And I think it could have been almost any ADC in the league in that is playing for 100 Thieves in that series against TSM. And I think it goes pretty much the same. It was all about Destiny and Yukino and how they were able to pair together and make plays around the map. So they almost seem like they have a new kind of flexibility, a new layer to their play than they had with Sniper. I can't imagine why. Maybe a little Darshan shot calling, perhaps. But for whatever the reason, I think they look a lot better. I think Dignitas Challengers should have lost to FlyQuest. So I'm willing to give this to 100 Thieves. So call it a hot take if you want.
Really, guys? I'm getting outvoted on probably the most normie take here. I think that Dixie just has their number. I don't know what to say, man. I agree with the articulation that TDS goes for, that Unforgiven probably is the best player out of anyone on either of these teams. The issue is he's playing ADC, man. The role sucks. Like, I understand that we're starting to focus bot again in this meta, but like, this is not a bot lane that you can just see Unforgiven walk into 2v2 and bully, get early kills, and snowball by themselves, right? So, with that in mind, I do believe we're going to get a refocus back to mid, and Insanity is just too good. They're going to have a little bit more priority early, or alternatively, they just pick ASOL, perma scale, have a free lane because Insanity is still very, very good at the laning phase, even on weak-sided champions. And I just don't really see a chance for 100 Thieves to convincingly be over a 50% win rate in the series. Like, they have a chance, don't get me wrong. We're always playing games of odds here. But I'm going to go and say, I think this is 2-0 for Dixie. I fear that 100 Thieves just will not be able to find their footing against a team like this.
It's really going to come down to Yukino, I think. If he can look like Yuji looked last week, then I think he can do it. I think XU got pretty exposed in that series. And I do think that Pretty is a little bit higher in my tier list than Spyrax. I think Pretty is one of the mid laners in this league who can go toe-to-toe with Insanity and do a good job. So I don't know. I'm looking forward to it, though. I think this is one of the better matchups that we've discussed so far. This is going to be an exciting series.
Yeah, if there's anything to watch, it's going to be this one. Two teams that genuinely can be top contenders going after one another. 100 Thieves, the collective best team as voted upon by the Salt Mine early on in our
Yeah.
lifespan, but at the same time, Dig C, the dark horse, the one that Bonfire nominated all those weeks ago, still going strong. It should be a good one overall, and like I said, it's close, right? I'm not giving any more than like a 10 to 20% edge, and even 20% feels like it's pushing it in favor of Digsy, but for me, at the very least, Digsy does come out on top. Probably 2-1, maybe 2-0, but like I said, that kind of differentiation comes much more down to just the inherent variation that comes from a best of three rather than it being about much else, right? At the same time, though, kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, Gordo, I still do believe that Dig C should lose to Fly Challengers. And if we get a best of 5 between the two teams, I think Dig C falls to Fly Challengers. It's just a matter of, where we are in the bracket right now. Fly C somehow is already in losers bracket, and it's just gathering their minions down there to make a really deep push. And so I guess for 100 Thieves, they got to breathe a sigh of relief that, in fact, they're going up against the inferior team and making it a little bit closer than I think it would be. But that could also be going a little too deep on Fly Challengers and how strong I think they are. We'll have to see.
All right, and then moving on to that lower bracket, we'll call you outvoted again, Nyarko, once again, as we're going to move 100 Thieves Challengers on. So that means we revisit the lower bracket. We are now in 1, 2, 3, 4. We're now in top 8. And this is the last round of best of threes. So this would be Wildcard Gaming taking on Fly Challengers to be in that top 6 category.
I said that I was never going to say that Wildcard 2-0s a series ever again, but I will say I think they're going to 0-2 a series. Fly Challengers just probably stomps these guys, unfortunately, bringing the end to one of the more storied teams, especially the more storied provisional teams in the entirety of the NACL.
It's kind of sad to say this, but I feel like they get outplayed in essentially every lane against FlyQuest. So yeah, it's a 2-0, a pretty straightforward 2-0. And I'm glad Wildcard showcase good things. I hope that their players either get moved up or they stay together. It would be fun anyway for the NCL, but I'm glad what they attempted and what they brought, the scores they brought forward as well. It was really fun to see. So I'm glad with what it happened, but every great story needs a crushing finale, and that's what is going to happen to Wildcard.
Yeah, it's really a shame too, because if they won, they would get to go play a best of 5 against Cincinnati Fear, at least the way we're drawing things out. So that would have been dope. But no, I mean, I'm not letting off the FlyQuest gas just for that reason. So I would also be on board for a FlyQuest win here, 2-0. And that takes us down to Golden Guardians Challengers versus TL Challengers for the last spot in the top 6. This would be another really tight one, at least in my books. Maybe not for Nyarko, because Nyarko thinks it's going to be Immortals here. But,
True.
yeah, I think regardless, I'm going to...
Really, guys? I was already bullied by Twitch chat this week. You're going to do this to me?
It's your prediction. If just reading your prediction is bullying you, Nyarko, I think you need to take a look at what you're predicting based off of.
It's more tedious immediately laughing at me.
Okay, that's fair. That's probably bullying. That probably counts as bullying. But speaking of bullying, I think TL Challengers is probably the better of these two teams based on what we've seen so far. I think they looked pretty solid in their series against Wildcard. I think they showed some good things against Cloud9 Challengers, and I think that team is kind of unbeatable for this league. So I think I will be predicting them to beat Golden Guardians.
I'll go. My prediction got messed up quite heavily by GG messing up with a cinched pick. I hate them for that because they would look amazing. And it also it doesn't put me in this spot because I wanted GG to do good and I want TLC to do good. Those are the two teams I was having a lot of hope and faith and emotions for. And now they're facing against each other. It's like watching your two childs fight against each other. Like the dumb child against the other dumb child. It's just so painful to see. And I gotta go with my dumb child, my first dumb child, the one that I have the biggest hopes for. I hope TLC does it, and I'm going for them. 2-1.
I'm 2-1
But
as
it's
well, by the
really
way. I
Aaron.
didn't give a record. I'm 2-1 as well.
Yeah.
Are you guys really Aaron is sparing these two teams? Come on, TDS.
It's
I wouldn't call them
it's
children to any degree whatsoever. They're like multi-million-dollar
no,
corporations.
they're the ones that I have in my heart, and that's why
Okay.
it's so difficult for me to see my dumb two children fighting against each other. But like, they're still dumb, and I still have to deal with this. And I still believe in TLC. The biggest problem here is that it's like the difference is if I said CLG TSM was 45-55, this is like 50. I think this is how it works, like 49.5 to 49.5 or 50.5 to 50.5. I'm not sure how it works. But
50.5,
like
49.5. You gotta have one or the other.
yeah, like it's something like that. That's it. That's the difference I'm going for. It's so minuscule that if GG does it, I would be absolutely not surprised at all. And I would
It's
be
40.
cursing against TLC.
It's 49.5 to 49.5, with the last percent just being that the two teams are constantly deadlocked forever. Because a League of Legends game doesn't actually have to end, and they'll be playing by the next time we're on the podcast.
It's
Yeah, why not?
the coin
Just
lands
make
on
it
its
suffer.
side, and it's
Yeah.
I will add one last thing. I think this is the most important series for TLC particularly because if they actually pull off, I think here is a really good sign because GG is one team that does try and go for like the early kind of game that can punish late game scaling really effectively. And if TLC shows really good signs of not only surviving that but being able to go against it in an effective manner, I think that it may change some of the dynamics in other matchups. But like this is their hardest test that they'll be facing, obviously so far, and may really be a good like showcase of their true skill.
Before I respond to TDS's point, I realized I didn't actually say who I think was going to win. I think it's pretty
Yeah.
obvious that I'm also on the TL train. Probably 2-0. At the very best, it's just going to be karmic punishment if this is how the bracket actually plays out, and we see IMT's defeaters themselves get pushed down and out of the bracket. I imagine that TL is probably going to emerge victorious here. But now, to respond to your point, TDS, they have to play against either 100 Thieves or Dignitas after this. I
Yep.
don't think that no matter how good they look here, that they actually have a chance against either of those teams.
Oh, like it's not necessarily that I think they need to look amazing. They just like the biggest thing is that this is the team that will more likely give them the biggest troubles in terms of early game play style. Because both 100 Thieves and Dixie, even though I do think they are probably better teams on paper, I would argue, they are not super early, fast paced kind of teams either. Like they don't punish you in the same way like a C9C or a GG does. So I feel like this is kind of the or FlyQuest C like we've seen recently as well either. So like this is the biggest test in that sense and the most similar matchup that you faced against C9C. That's kind of the main thing here because style wise or play style wise, I think TLC is similar to a certain degree to 100 Thieves. Similar, not the same at all. It's particularly bottling, but similar to a certain degree.
all right. Two more matches. These would be our first best of fives. Based on our
Yeah.
predictions, we have Cincinnati Fear taking on FlyQuest Challengers in the first best of five on Monday.
Well, I see probably 3-0s. Once again, variance maybe it's a 3-1, but it certainly is not going to be favored for Fear, regardless of what you write the record as. At least in my eyes, FlyC is one of the best teams in the league, and at this point, they've played enough matches for me to confidently say that they are gelling with this roster, with everybody on land now. Sure, maybe they didn't ban the Aurelian Soul. They've clearly learned that lesson, not only for specifically the Dig matchup, but I think for future matchups in the bracket as well. So I just don't really see them giving Fear any quarter.
So I just realized that in my bracket, I didn't put this as the PO5, but like everything, there's things wrong with my bracket anyway, so it's not like it matters that much. But yeah, I think it's going to be a 3-0 for FlyQuest. They are running, I put them as running the gauntlet. I still think they're going to run the gauntlet. And I actually think that running the gauntlet, it probably gives them even more power because it gives them more like playtime, more prep time. Well, not more prep time, but more playtime and more like cohesion. Because we need to remember, Winsome came in like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, more or less, to play with the team. So any more extra games they get is better for them.
And this isn't like Evo or a fighting game tournament where you're just jamming game after game after game in losers bracket in the course of like 1 or 2 days. You have a lot of rest time. I don't think that endurance is actually going to be a major issue for a deep losers bracket run, especially for a team like Fly Challengers. Uh, really, given how the narrative is playing out, they almost were dropped losers bracket in a fluke game, right? And with that being the case, this is the most winningest team or the team with the highest momentum experiencing a temporary setback. And as good as Fear has been, as much as they have indelibly impacted the perceptions of the NACL and the way that we talk about provisional teams, this is unfortunately where the run comes to an end. Not at all a bad showing from them, but you know, I actually I'll give them a charity game. I'm going to say 3-1. I'm going to go back and say 3-1, but you know, that's mostly just a thank you gift for them making this a very exciting split. Unfortunately, that time is here. Yeah. Thank you for existing, Fear. You know, kind of shocked we're here and thanking you after the start to the season and everything that we said in our first episode. But, you know, I guess we also got to make amends on that front.
Yeah, well, there goes my hot take, because I would also say 3-1 for Fly Challengers. You know, I think Perry can get there one game. You know, he sets up Shochi, he sets up Faisal. You know, something happens somewhere, and they manage to eke out a win. I'm gonna predict that at the very least. I think they have enough of a cohesive strategy together, and I think they're good enough players that they'll be able to find one somewhere. I also think like Philip and Spyrax are punishable. You know, I think the team as a whole looks very good, but I think the solo lanes are the weak point, at least at this juncture. And I think Cincinnati Fear can take advantage of that and win a game, maybe even win 2 games. But I would not be predicting them to actually take the whole series. So looks like we're unanimous on that one. And then let's move it down to the lower bracket. We got Dig Challengers up against TL Challengers based on our predictions. Would be 100 Thieves Challengers if you believe in a Dig win in the upper bracket. But I think regardless, this is where we have to lose some faith for TL. I've sent them farther than I expected to in the preseason, and even farther than I probably would have expected to in a lot of the regular season. Like, I was not super high on this team, especially after they started slipping later on. They've made a pretty deep run here. I've predicted them over Golden Guardians Challengers, which surprises even myself, but I will not predict them over Dignitas. I think Dignitas is moving on.
My bracket had 100 Thieves here. And even then, I had TLC over them. Now, Dixie is still something I think TLC can beat. Especially if they beat GGC, I think TLC will pull it off. I'm gonna call out the hot take of mine over all the brackets, over the bracket this time around. TLC will win, and I think I will say 3-1. I'm gonna go 3-1. If the thing is, if it goes to 5 games, I think they lose. so it has to be a 3-1 at at the bare minimum. So yeah, I'm gonna believe. I have high hopes for TLC. Like I said, it's my dumb child, and I have a lot of expectations and belief, and I like them, and I hope APA pulls off and he hyper carries the games, because I believe in APA. And 3-1, yeah, those are my reasons.
I respect your fandom, TDS, given that I have been voting for Immortals throughout the night. I just cannot fathom this happening to Dig C, a team that I would say maybe if you were to read them as uncharitably as possible, had a small slip up at the end of the season, but otherwise has been just perfectly consistent, very, very dominant. Winning almost all of their matchups. And also, they're one of these top teams without a roster swap, any kind of switch ups, right? There's no, talk about, going from Eminence to Diplex, right? There's no alteration topside where Sniper's leaving or taking a break, right? This is a team that has had a winning formula from day one. They have adjusted to the meta pretty well. They continue to win late. I don't know. I just don't really see TL unfortunately having much of a chance here. I'll go 3-1 because 3-0s suck, and I actually think are like pretty hard to pull off regardless of how good of a team you are, right? Like it's the classic T1 problem of just, inting a game, giving a free one over. But, for best of 5, I don't think that they're doing that twice in a row. I think that this is pretty clearly going to be in Dig's wheelhouse.
I respect it. Like I have my belief, but I'll try and give some analytical thoughts on the why. Because there's one thing that DXC will always struggle here against almost every like team, and it's I think bot lane it's not going to be an issue, or like if you go against DXC. So for TLC, that is a team that doesn't have a really aggressive bot lane that can make the most out of them. I think Dixie is one of the better matchups because if it was 100 Thieves, I would be much more worried. Like Unforgiven would have punished Arrow much, much more, and same for Kim Down. So that is a little bit of a positive. And then I think that top lane wise, once again, Hoon was a player that I thought he wasn't performing the best in terms of how he probably was on the regular season to now. I don't think that he's performing to that higher of a degree. I think that he will struggle against every remaining top laner. So I feel like there's potential for TLC side lanes to actually be able to perform because they are not going to get pushed into a tough situation. And if it becomes a battle for late game fights, I think TLC has improved up tremendously into that. And once again, if they are able to go over a team that can actually punish them early on, like GGC, I think that 100 Dixie will be a team that they can go against as well. Now, it looks difficult. It's really difficult. Like, once again, if they goes to 5 games, Dixie probably wins that. But I think it's going to be the 3-1 for TLC. It's my hot take.
I respect the hot take, but yeah, I'm with Nyarko in that I think it's going to be Dig Challengers taking it. I do think it's a fair point that I think their bot lane isn't quite as aggressive as they once were when they had Tomo. But I don't think that completely eliminates them as a threat. I think Spawn has looked like a serviceable team fighting AD carry. I think he's had some really great positioning and repositioning in some of these fights, especially in the Winterside bracket up against FlyQuest. I think he had some very solid games there. And even though a lot of the credit goes to Insanity, I think he individually had some good performances. I will also say, I think Diamond, like on the Thresh especially, really surprised me this last week. I think he looked really good. Just found a lot of really good dark passage angles, found a lot of really good hooks, and really kept them in some of those games. So, was as crucial a part as anybody of dragging these games against Fly Challengers out as long as they needed to be dragged out. And even showed a little bit of extra depth with the Morgana pick. Didn't work out, but looked at least solid in lane. So I'm excited to see Diamond throughout the rest of this tournament. I think he might surprise some people. And I'm going to continue to predicting the Chess Challengers to win up until they rematch FlyQuest.
You mean until they lose to TLC, right? Because it's going to happen.
No, I'm predicting them over TLC right now. That's what's happening here. So
yeah, but okay, you guys are wrong. It's going to be a TSMC situation again.
Fair enough. Well, we'll have another check in next week to find out who does end up being right. Where we'll probably stay on this slightly different upload schedule. This is coming out on a Friday morning instead of a Thursday morning, as per usual. And since the next week goes, I guess it's just one series on Tuesday, so maybe we could conceivably marathon it and then record, but probably not going to happen. Probably going to be another Friday morning episode. So that's going to do it for this week. So we will see you on that next Friday morning. Thank you, as always, for tuning on in to check out the NACL this weekend. And we're going to be back next week with a similar setup. We'll have 8 series once again to break down, or 8 series to break down, or 10 series? 1, 2, 6, 10 series. 10 series to break down. 2 of them best of 5s. So a lot of gameplay coming in. And then we're going to be really deep into the bracket at that point. I mean, we're going to already be in top 4. So going to be some real in-depth discussions of those teams as we approach the winner side final and the loser side semifinal. But till then, that is going to do it. We will see you all next time.